because Mindy is the CEO of a health organization, we'll be talking a little bit about that. But this obviously goes to more than just healthcare organizations. It goes to many organizations, particularly though obviously those with a board, a governing board that is responsible for paying a CEO, whether that's a nonprofit board or a for-profit board. So we'll see a lot of those principles that do apply to healthcare, but also can be applied to other organizations, for-profit and nonprofit as well. So our agenda today is we'll be doing an overview of the board's role, particularly as it relates, well, generally, and then particularly as it relates to evaluating the CEO, and then compensation best practices and regulations around that. And then we are going to reserve a little bit of time at the very end to go over live questions. So we're going to start high level and keep working down, and then hopefully by then you'll have had most of your questions answered. But we're definitely excited to hear what questions you have. And to that end, you'll see Malik and Malik tech support, and um, that is who you'll want to message for the questions. Since Mindy and I are presenting, we won't be able to watch the questions, but you can message that user here, Malik and Malik tech support, and she'll read those questions. It's Kana behind that name, and so she'll read those questions to us at the end. And it looks like we have Mindy, you're back.
I'm back. Sorry, I was experiencing a few technical issues, but
Great.
happy to be
Like
here.
I just gave a little bit of a background, and so we can go ahead and move forward, and we'll do our introductions. So I want to talk a little bit about our firm, and Malik and Malik provides general counsel, strategic planning, and board governance services to businesses around the country. And we have a lot of lawyers, a lot of experience in this area throughout the country, primarily in the West. We have experienced advice on legal needs, including federal, state, and local legal compliance, human resources and employment law issues, policies and procedures, operational audit preparation, negotiation resolution with third-party payers, mergers and acquisitions, and as it relates to that little parenthetical there, including successor and interest applications, Mindy and I will probably touch on that a little bit, but that's specific to the healthcare industry that Mindy's in, as is 340B compliance, Medicaid and Medicare billing issues, licensure issues, board and leadership alignment, which is the focus of this presentation. And we also do some revenue cycle management counseling through our organization as well. And then I'm going to turn it over to Mindy, and she can tell you a little bit about her amazing organization.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here today. Thanks, Luke, for inviting me. Just real quick, I want to give a shout out to Malik and Malik for their services. They're truly an embedded part of our leadership team at Health West and help us in all the ways that Luke spoke to earlier. And we would not be where we are without their services. So very thankful for all the work that they do, as well as the opportunity to be here today. And like Luke previously mentioned, I'm Mindy Benedetti. I'm the CEO for Health West. I've been with Health West now for close to 20 years, and in my current role for close to 12 years. So absolutely love the work of community health centers and the mission and the ability to be able to serve our communities. Health West, we were established in 1976 in a little town of Aberdeen, Idaho, in a single wide trailer home. There was a provider who was providing services in that community, and he was about to close his doors, and he applied for a grant to the federal government and was awarded, and that's when Health West was born, and we became a community health center. We have 18 clinics across 3 different states, including Idaho, Utah, and Wyoming, and then we have 11 school-based sites where we provide services as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you for the kind words, Mindy. So with that, you and I can just jump right into the board's role, just from a really high level perspective. Mindy has heard this spiel many times, so we'll just really high level, the board responsibilities, right? are determining the mission and purposes of the organization. And what that means is you got to be really clear on your why. And Mindy had her why up on that last slide. Our firm has a why as well, which is to change the world for the better. But it's the board that is the cornerstone of what makes organization work, is making sure that the people at the highest levels of leadership start with alignment amongst themselves and carry that alignment through the rest of the organization. So determining the mission and purposes of the organization is very important. And then selecting and evaluating the performance of the chief executive officer. Obviously, we're going to be talking about that. And then also strategic and organizational planning. As it relates to the CEO, obviously there's multiple aspects of this, and really, you're going to hear this theme throughout the day, which is for nonprofits specifically, you have a volunteer board, and that becomes a really difficult thing when you have a very complex organization, a difficult balance to hit. And I'll let Mindy talk about that as well. But it creates certain challenges when you have people that are only spending a few hours a month providing high level governance, evaluating the efficacy of somebody who has a very, very complex job. You need to make sure that you have good processes in place, and make it a dedicated part of what you're doing. And those certain responsibilities include hiring the CEO, evaluating the performance, approving the CEO's compensation, and co-creating annual performance goals with that CEO, and then partnering to assure day-to-day management is aligned with those board established priorities and policies. As I mentioned in the previous slide, that alignment has to start at the top. That's the cornerstone of success, is making sure that everyone is aligned on why you exist and what your purposes are. And then that alignment should carry through. That should be the lens every decision in your organization is made. Every decision your organization makes should be through that lens, making sure that you have that alignment in all of your, like it says, your priorities, your policies, and strategies. Is there anything you also want to add on that, particularly around that difficulty with that balance between having a board that understands your community, specifically with a community health center, Mindy, and and then the complexity of the business that you're running?
No, I think you're exactly right. Like, one of the challenges, but also the parts I love the most about my position, is that I serve a board of directors, and that they're the ones that set the strategic direction for the organization and really map out where our organization's going. We call it our North Star at Health West. So it's really what's guiding us and directing us on a day-to-day basis. And the board's role in setting that direction is key for our health center to be responsible and successful as we go along.
Great. So again, that clarity has to run through the entire organization, but it has to start at the top, right? So the board has to be the purveyors of what is most important. And again, that cornerstone, if you're not aligned on why you do what you do, you're not going to align on pretty much anything else. And this alignment at the most fundamental level makes making decisions easier, including the topic that we're talking about today. Right. If the leadership at the board level, the highest level of the organization, is clear on your sense of purpose, your north, or like Mindy said, to call it your North Star, or whatever you call it, you have to know why, and that has to be something that can easily be repeated and agreed upon and discussed on a regular basis amongst your leadership. So clarity regarding your mission. Why are we here? I always say, good leaders take people from point A to point B with clarity, right? It's so hopefully a leader is somebody who leads, but a good leader is taking people to a better future. So what is that point B? Being clear on what that point B, which is the next slide. Where are we going, right? So point B, being very clear on what a better future looks like, and then finally how you're going to get there. So first deciding why you're all there so that you have that alignment, deciding where you're going to go, and then finally how you're going to get there. Anything you want to add on that, Mindy?
Yeah, this is extremely helpful, and I think really helps our organization. So our vision is we want to be the very best place to work. And in turn, we feel like that's going to result in our patients receiving the very best care. And having that guidance really helps our team on a day-to-day basis know and make decisions, which when we get into the strategy part, is a big piece of it as well, as far as, how are we going to get there? But yeah, key
Yeah.
to the success of our organization, having that guidance.
And to tie this into to everything, that how, making sure that you have a relationship that makes your CEO successful or gives them a platform for success by providing clarity from that top level is an important part of the how, in terms of attaining that better future that we're talking about. And in talking to boards, I'm always really clear with them that the board has a reason for existing as well, which is to ensure the success of the mission. So the organization has a mission, a sense of why, but the board exists for a reason as well, and that is to ensure the success of that mission. It's an important distinction to make, that it's not everything that you do is for the mission is to pursue the mission of the organization. It's to ensure that the organization has the ability to achieve that success, right? And so the difference is you're not providing in Mindy's case, for example, the board isn't providing healthcare. The board is providing the security, clarity, and leadership so that the organization can pursue that mission and do the things that are laid out in the mission of Health West, right? And so everything that you do should tie back to the reason for existing. So leading the organization with clarity. Again, how are we going to get to this better place? Being very clear both about what this better place in the future is and how we're going to get there. Recruiting, selecting, and obviously retaining the best CEO. The market's only getting more competitive out there, so making sure that you are communicating well with your CEO about what expectations are, and making them feel like they have a shot at being successful in a very difficult role is a huge part of that retention. And it's not fun to go find a new CEO, but when you do, you want to make sure that you as a board are setting that person up, either the person you have or the person you're going to go find for success. And then establishing aligned performance goals. And what we mean by that is you have to have alignment, obviously, amongst yourselves as board members, with your CEO, and then with the mission, vision, and strategic plan of the organization. So if you have a strategic plan, you're saying this is the most important thing, list of things that we want to accomplish, and you want to make sure that you are reiterating that with the clarity to say to your CEO, this is how we view success. We have decided these are our priorities from a very high level, and this is how we're going to be looking at success. And then evaluating the CEO performance against those goals, and then setting competitive compensation to ensure excellence through retention. Mindy, anything you want to add on this slide?
Just incredibly helpful. And I think you're going to recruit a stronger CEO if you have all these steps checked off before you start that interview process, if you're aligned. I think CEO candidates, when they come and interview with your organization, this is what they're looking for. They're looking for, how do I be successful at this organization, and how do I help this organization be successful? And so if you've done this work, it's going to help you recruit the right candidate, as well as it'll help that candidate be successful once they're here.
Yeah. And you're saying that as somebody who's been through a lot of this as well, right? I mean, that's your
I have,
personal
yes, I've
experience. So.
served on very high functioning boards, as well as I have a very high functioning board at Health West. And then I've also, unfortunately, served on some boards that weren't as high functioning. And it's a night and day difference. And you really feel for the CEOs or individuals who are trying to lead an organization when they don't have that clear direction. I think it can get really frustrating for not only that CEO, but the entire team, and cause confusion within the organization because they can't give their team direction if they don't know where they're going.
I don't want to probe too much, but I mean, can you explain the difference as a CEO when your board is being clear with you about what the expectations are versus when they're not being clear about what success looks like?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges a lot of boards run into, you can get some really strong candidates on that board, and I think they can all have a different vision for where they would like to take the organization. So if you haven't established that, or if they each have different strategic goals for where they would like the organization to go, or if they're also maybe meddling in operations or they're um not clear with what their role is as a board member, that can be really challenging as well too. Um, and and like you said, it causes confusion and really prevents or puts up roadblocks from that CEO being successful.
I mentioned this quite a bit because I've seen it firsthand, but maybe you could talk a little bit about how it impacts your leadership. In other words, if you're not provided with security and clarity from above, it's hard to provide that moving down through the organization.
There's not that clarity to the CEOs, so then it has a trickle effect and it's probably tenfold as it makes its way down the organization. So that staff are confused around, what are my objectives? What are our end goals as an organization? They don't know what direction they're going. So when you talk about how successful leaders get from point A to point B, they don't know what point B is. So you have an organization where every leader, they're trying to lead, they're trying to be successful, but they don't have the direction they need to know where we're going as an organization.
Yeah. All right. So again, if as we're going along, we're not seeing questions. So if you want to ask questions, please ping the Malik and Malik tech support icon or person. So okay, we'll go ahead and talk about the process of evaluating the CEO, which is for a volunteer board, again, going back to that concept of having a good process really helps protect from dropping the ball. And when you have an organization that has volunteers, and you have somebody, you can go from somebody that's very, very involved in driving the process forward. But if you don't have a process that can be handed down to the next person, when that really involved person walks away, what happens and where does that clarity come from? And I think the most difficult part about that is when you don't have that process, it breaks down, and all of a sudden you have no sense of continuation or continuity and clarity around what success looks like, right? And so having a process, having something that's repeatable, having something that's based in your mission, your vision, and your strategic plan, and then making sure that everybody knows what that process is going to be so that there's clarity, provides a tremendous amount of security, again, to the CEO, to the whole organization, and helps set everyone else up for success.
I think it's important to set those expectations with the CEO early. Um, the CEOs for different organizations, they hopefully are a high performer, and so they're used to this process, but what they're not used to is how to guide a board around how to do this. And so I think that's when it's important as a board to make sure, you've set this guidance, like Luke was saying early on. CEOs, they thrive off of feedback. They want that feedback so they can learn how to do better and how to lead the organization better. And so, yes, having a strong process for how you go about this process, I think, is also key for that CEO success at the organization as well.
And so the board's role in that, obviously, beyond the clarity, is establishing those goals that align with the mission and vision, and evaluating the CEO's performance against those goals, assessing the compensation structure, and ensuring continued excellence through retention and goal setting. Okay, so oversight and evaluation best practices. Um, so regular interaction and open lines of communication, right? If even in a situation like Mindy's and other nonprofit healthcare organizations, it's a really important for the board to be engaged. The board has a fiduciary duty to understand what's happening with the organization, not down to the most granular level, but to understand the key metrics for success. So what are your key performance indicators, and is your CEO giving you the information that you need on that? And are you being clear about what it is that you want to see and consistent from meeting to meeting? One of the breakdowns that we see sometimes when you don't have this larger level of clarity and communication is priorities can change midstream. Priorities can change even from month to month. So what you think is a priority one month can drop to the bottom of the list, and because some intervening thing happened in the interim, um, now you have a situation where the CEO is being surprised by what seems to be the focus of the board. And Mindy said it really well, which is communicate that early and be consistent. So keeping those regular interactions, open lines of communication.
Yeah, I think a
Having it,
good,
yeah,
oh,
go ahead.
I think a good example of this is when we had COVID hit our healthcare system. We had a strategic goal at the time of improving quality. Well, we couldn't get patients in, and quality was no longer a key area of focus for our organization. So this is where the board and myself and our executive team had conversations around, okay, right now our top goal is getting patients access to care, and responding to COVID in whichever manner we can. So we had to pivot really quickly. And I think having those open lines of communication was key during that time.
And then back. Oh, sorry. We're actually, yeah, going to stay on that slide for just a little bit longer. Sorry, Kana. The Executive Evaluation Committee having a dedicated process to this. What I mean by that is you have a committee that is ongoing, because too often we've seen organizations just drop off, say, okay, we got it done this year, and then all of a sudden it's evaluation time again, and who's in charge, who's on first, and all of that, and we're scrambling to catch up and doing the exact opposite of what Mindy said. Mindy said to give early feedback and early expectations, and if you don't have a set process, if you don't have a committee, if you don't have deadlines set, and we even encourage you to put deadlines inside your policy so that you know, okay, at this date we're going to start this process or this aspect of the process and move forward from there. So having that dedicated committee is, I think, a huge part of this. Um, and the performance appraisals conducted in a timely manner based on the elements of the job descriptions, well-defined objective goals, and then thorough, complete, contemporaneous documentation of discussions surrounding executive performance.
And I think this is all key. I think having all of this in place prior to starting the process makes it less uncomfortable for everyone. I think it can be uncomfortable as a CEO to bring this up with the board. I also think it can be uncomfortable for the board to address this too. So having a process in place, I think, makes it less awkward for everyone, and just sets those clear guidelines around here's where we're going and how we're going to get there and how to be successful as a CEO.
That's an excellent point, Mindy. You and I have both seen instances where the CEO is in charge of basically driving the process forward on their own review, and that's a really, really uncomfortable place and ineffective place for the board to be. The board truly needs to take responsibility over this process and drive the thing forward, and have again, that continuity can't be stressed enough, to make sure that it's a process that can be repeated even as members of your leadership change. So this is just a graphic of the process, right? And like we were talking about, having this process set up early, having those dates set, and being really clear about how it's going to work, but establishing the committee, and so the board will delegate some authority to that committee, and that works really well to keep things moving. So you don't have to pull the full board together to keep individual aspects of this moving. And then gathering input, the committee seeks input from the full board regarding the CEO's performance. And we can talk about that a little bit as well. Administering the self and 360 evaluation based on the input gathered, and the committee administers self-evaluation and 360 evaluations. Compiling those results, the committee compiles results from all evaluations. And then finally, presenting the results. The committee shares the results to the full board for final approval, and the results are shared with the CEO. So again, that communication. Anything you want to add there before we move into compensation, Mindy?
Nothing additional.
Yeah, I think we've hammered process quite a bit, so it is important. And then compensating the CEO. This is where it can really become a difficult thing as well. And I'm going to say some of the things that CEOs can't say, which is, this can be really uncomfortable because you have in many organizations, healthcare, for-profit, nonprofit, you have a really competitive market out there for leaders who can provide results, right? And so that retention becomes a real problem in nonprofits specifically. Um, Dealing with the amount of money that is competitive in that market can be a really uncomfortable issue sometimes. So making sure that you have a resource you can go to understand what the market that your talent is competing in is a really important part of making sure that you have retention and have continuity, have stability, have clarity inside your organization. Go ahead. So these are just some of the best practices that we encourage. Having a board approved compensation philosophy, and hopefully um, uh, that philosophy is documented in a policy, right? So that again, this is something that is consistent from year to year. That doesn't mean that it's not going to change from year to year. You can always reserve the right to get smarter and do things better, but having a place where you can start and say, this is our policy as of right now, and we're going to continue to adhere to the principles of this policy, be consistent with our philosophy. This compensation model should be consistent with your mission, your vision, and your values. Again, it should be a board adopted policy. And then again, having an executive compensation committee. It can be the same as your review committee, but it doesn't have to be. But again, going back to process, having a really good process to ensure that you have continuity and repeatable systems from those who are serving at one time to those who are going to be serving in the future. And then revisiting job descriptions and goals annually to ensure they accurately reflect the duties, responsibilities, expectations of the position. And I would say again, you always reserve the right to get smarter and do things better. Always reviewing it through the lens of your mission. Is this moving us forward with our sense of purpose and where we're ultimately headed? And then having the board approved executive compensation package that is regularly reviewed, reasonable, and competitive. And then, of course, really strong documentation. And this is the lawyer in me speaking, making sure that you are being candid in this process and saying, okay, so here's where the strengths are, here's where the weaknesses are. And you want to be able to tell a story about how you got to your success or how, in the event that you have to part ways with the CEO, how you got to that conclusion as well. Mindy, anything you want to add just on the best practices here?
I think you did a great job of covering it. The only thing I think would be the timeliness of some of these things. So I would encourage to not change the philosophy or any of the goals midterm on a CEO, but rather at the conclusion of seeing if an individual is meeting their goals or when you go to reset it. I think aligning these processes at a minimum with your strategic plan. So as you set new strategic goals, revisiting this might be a smart decision as well to ensure that those two directions align really closely. And yes, strong documentation is key as well. And there might be some regulatory. So I know as community health centers, we're required to document this process and to show our funders that we're following a best practice for this. And so that's something else to take into consideration as far as what are the regulations for your organization for the documentation in this process as well.
I do. That kind of reminds me of something, Mindy, and I'd love to hear your take on this as well. But, for a lot of organizations who don't have set policies, who don't have set procedures, who have not created their committees yet and don't have stuff in writing, it can be really difficult to kind of run the process of creating all this at the same time that you're keeping the organization running. So you have a finite number of resources and you have to keep the process moving from year to year. So you're kind of, if you don't have a set process, you're kind of doing it ad hoc. And you have people on the board saying, okay, so how are we going to review the CEO this year and figure out their compensation? And then it's almost a separate project. It's not almost, it is a separate project to say, we're going to do it better in the future. So at the same time that we're doing everything this year, we're going to set up a better process for next year at the same time. So, it's really two dedicated projects that you're running simultaneously. But as an organization, you have to make that conscious decision to say, we're not going to just stop what we're doing right now, but we are going to be consciously creating something better for the future.
Yeah, it's true. And I think, unintentionally, sometimes the goals that you set for CEO might compete with your strategic objectives. And if there's a financial incentive for a CEO to work on their own goals versus the strategic goals, it might once again create some confusion for, what direction they're headed, or even give them a financial incentive to not um, meet the strategic goals of the organization.
Yeah, well said. Okay, so this is just really quick. Some regulations. Compensation must be reasonable. That is so every industry is going to have something specific to it. This is specific to the industry that Mindy's in, right? Is the compensation must be reasonable. That's the Health Resources Services Administration Compliance Manual. And then you have to avoid excess benefit transactions for 501(c)(3)s. That applies to all nonprofits. And then compensation must be allowable and allocable under federal awards. And then following three-pronged rebuttal presumption for reasonableness, that's IRS regulation. And then obviously sex, gender-based wage discrimination is prohibited. As is discrimination based on race, color, religion, national origin. Um, Statute of limitation is reset with each discriminatory paycheck, and ensuring this executive compensation is not excessive. In Mindy's industry, the FQHC is receiving federal funding. And compensation must be transparently reported. So, like for nonprofits, the 990 disclosure, this is something that boards should take into account. That you're going to be accountable at the end of the day for how this is being run. And so if you're not following some of these regulations, it'll become pretty apparent pretty quickly because there are disclosure requirements. Okay, so again, having that repeatable written down process that can happen year to year and will happen year to year is really important. This is separate than reviewing. And I'll just say again, it doesn't have to be a different committee, but it has to be different tasks within the committee, viewing compensation different than reviewing your chief executive. So adopting that philosophy that we talked about, establishing a committee, making sure that you have people dedicated to this process and are continuing it on an ongoing basis, not just throwing something together at the end of the year. Gathering external benchmarks, again, going and finding what market are you actually competing in with your talent, and how are we going to make sure that we're not losing it, or that that we have the talent that we need that we should be driving us forward. And then presenting benchmarks. The compensation committee presents external benchmark recommendations to the full board. And again, at the end of the day, your whole board should be bought in just like they are into your mission, your vision, your strategy. This is part of your strategy. The board approves the whole compensation structure because it is such an important part of your whole strategy. Mindy, anything you want to add there?
Yep.
And then here the key elements of compensation, and this can vary a little bit between organizations, but a lot of times we're talking with our clients about the base salary. Obviously, that's performing your job functions. What is the market requiring for the talent that you have, and what does that base salary look like? And then having performance-based incentives. We prefer calling them incentives over bonuses because bonuses have less clarity. An incentive is we are asking you to achieve this specific thing. And if you do, then you get this incentive. So if you do this, then you get that. And then having severance or transition agreements. So making sure that, again, there's clarity throughout the whole process. And this includes, if you're looking down the road and saying, okay, at some point in time, we're going to have a succession plan. What does that succession plan look like? And let's have an open conversation about it. Even with your best CEO, that CEO is not going to last forever. At some point in time, they're going to want to go do other things with their life, and that's okay. So let's make sure that we have a plan set for how that's actually going to work. And then setting the benefits, and then what sort of non-monetary compensation is being considered in this. So, and Mindy, I'd love to hear your thoughts on some of these, just based on the boards that you've served on and your own experience as well.
I think all of these are key. I would pay particular attention, like Luke was saying, to what your succession plan is and make sure the severance or the transition agreement aligns with that. I think you can get really creative with CEOs and how to go about a transition plan. So maybe the longer they're with the organization, the more that severance pay would be. But really making sure there's also protections built into those transition agreements for the organization as well. And then non-monetary compensation, I think, especially in this day and age where most organizations are tied for funds, I think you can get creative with some different ways on how to really provide extra benefits to your CEO without it having a monetary value.
Are there any of those that you have seen that you think are particularly effective that you can share?
Yeah, I've seen some boards allow for a leave for the CEO for so long. Maybe they cover some benefits for like FMLA compensation or just time away, I think, for the CEO. And yeah, I think there's quite a few along that line that you can do. Maybe PTO that increases as the CEO works at the organization.
Yeah, great.
We also received some questions that align with this well. A request for examples of excess benefits.
I have a few that I could definitely share. And again, um, having a good corporate ethic is extremely important. And so making sure that you have leadership that is aligned with your mission, your vision, and in touch with the services that you're providing, you're ensuring the success of the mission, right? That's the role of the board that we talked about earlier. So making sure that you have benefits that are in line with all of that. So if there are excessive benefits, such as a really expensive vehicle, for example, for the personal use of the executive, or things that wouldn't necessarily be approachable, particularly. So we're talking about the nonprofit space right now and so seeing an organization that is tasked with taking care of everyone in society, and then having a CEO go around with a corporate benefit that is unattainable to everybody else in the organization, and being able to flaunt it, and that could be a really distracting and demoralizing thing for the whole organization. Does not move the organization towards a better place, is not aligned with the mission of the organization. So that's, I'm sure there's many more examples, but trying not to be too specific to my own experiences. Is there anything you want to add on that, Mindy?
The one that really comes to mind is lending your CEO money. and then doing some kind of a forgiveness for that. So I think you have to be careful with that as well too. So making sure, if it is an incentive or a bonus, it's truly structured as that, and you're working with a legal team on how to make sure that you're in compliance with that. Um, yeah, the vehicles I think is another one where you have a CEO, like Luke was saying, that's driving the vehicle on the organization, or maybe an open-ended credit card for expenses that where there's not a clear policy on what are allowable expenses and what are not allowable expenses.
Yeah.
Right. There's another one too here that is, what is your take on base salary and an annual bonus? Do you see it as a percentage of base salary, or how do you analyze what that number of the annual bonus should be?
Well, I'll share my philosophy a little bit with that, and kind of where we work with our clients is, again, not so much saying bonuses, but saying incentives. So if you do X, Y, Z, then you do this. And for all organizations, right? A lot of that incentive can be based around what sort of resources are you bringing in. So for nonprofits, nonprofits don't have profit, but they can drive their mission forward with a better margin. So how efficiently is the organization being run so that there can be more resources at the end of the day to expand services? And Mindy is a fantastic CEO. I enjoy working with her every day that I do, and she's also very, very focused on making sure that resources that come in through efficient running of the company are redirected into investment that helps more and more communities in more and more ways all the time. So, really, your incentives should be a mirror. And when you look in that mirror, it should reflect your mission, it should reflect your vision, it should reflect your values, and it should reflect your strategic plan. So when you hold up that mirror, are you seeing the things that you want to see reflected what um, in what you're incentivizing? So an incentive is just that. You're incentivizing behavior that that improves on your mission, improves on your vision, improves on your values, improves on your strategic plan, right? And so that's why bonuses don't really have that clarity, because that bonus is just, okay, well, we think you did pretty good this year. Here's some extra cash. And to the second part of the question, in terms of how you structure it, I think there's quite a bit of latitude there in saying, well, it can be a percentage of your salary. It could be a percentage of, the resources that you were able to get beyond budget to redirect into services, and that kind of thing.
I think having a good resource to set these is key as well. So whether you're working with Malik and Malik on some benchmark data, or you're working with an association to get some benchmark data, that can also help you determine what percentage it should be, and to make sure that you're competitive with other organizations within your industry.
Okay, great. Um, Other considerations. So the scope of responsibilities again. So this is the scope of the responsibilities of the organization as a whole. So starting with the board, but so this is in addition to, but also a part of the compensation for your CEO. Are you taking all of this into consideration as part of your overall duties to say, okay, so we have to have alignment with our mission, our vision, and our strategy, and we want our CEO to be focused on the things that are most important. And these are the things that are really need to be paid attention to. So a lot of this goes to base salary, right? An annual operating budget. Adhering to a budget isn't something that you would provide an incentive over necessarily, but it'd be a responsibility that is part of that ongoing responsibility of the CEO. The number of locations for the services that you're providing, and the number of and types of services in Mindy's industry, the patients, in other industries, customers, members, um, and then recruitment challenges and longevity, particularly now in the era we're living in right now. A workforce, as we all know, is a difficult issue to tackle if you don't already have a good existing program. And so, making sure that that becomes a really, really strong pillar inside your organization. So, anything you want to add there, Mindy?
Yep, I think you know that these are all just critical, I think, when you go to do that analysis of that base salary. And like you said, maybe an example of something that might be a recruitment challenge is if you're in a rural area such as Alaska, it's going to be much harder to recruit, and something that you should take into consideration versus um, other areas where it might be easier to recruit or you might have more availability as well.
All right, that brings us to our live Q&A. Thank you, Luke and Mindy, for what you've shared so far. Anyone is welcome to add some more questions to our Q&A. We do have one that we'll get started on now. So this person is looking for some suggestions for an early stage or startup that may not attract the most robust board and could have levels of dysfunctional behavior. How should they navigate that scenario as it relates to CEO and other C-suite roles in a startup environment?
Um, yeah, that's a great question. So, I think that depends on the industry that you're in, but having a board that understands the industry you're in is one of the best things that you can do for your organization. I'm talking about a for-profit or a nonprofit. Having a group of people, whether you formalize it or not, that can help guide you in the right direction. I can tell you that from my personal experience, having advisors that aren't afraid to tell me what the truth is and can give me the unvarnished version of reality that I need in order to be a better leader is huge. And I'm guessing that Mindy feels the same way. I think,
Absolutely.
what's that, Mindy?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. I say this to not so much to Mindy, but other nonprofits quite a bit. Because nonprofits are required to have a board, I think sometimes they forget what a resource that board can be. So building out the right talent is worth the effort. So even if it is, as the question asks, a really difficult industry to recruit people to, it becomes a very, very high level priority to go get the right people because everything else flows from that. So get the right people who will tell you the truth and will help lead you to a better place. By taking the very responsibilities that we've talked about here seriously, go find the people that are going to hold hold themselves to that level of discipline to be good, and also hold the organization to that level of discipline, so that you can set a better stage for what success looks like. So, Mindy, I'll go ahead and let you.
Yeah,
Um,
just as an example in the community health center world, one of my functions as a CEO, which I hold very dear to my heart, is the ability to report to a board of directors. And our board of directors, there's a requirement for it to be at least 51% of the users of the organization. And then they take it even a step further and they look at the service area and the demographic that we serve to make sure that that board truly represents that population base. And so I would encourage you to really also take into consideration who your end consumer is and what the goals of those end consumers would be, and make sure that your board either could be a potential client of it and or represents that community, so that your end user or your client is represented on your board.
Another question here, thank you both, is while evaluating the CEO's performance, does a member of the board compensation committee speak with employees directly, perhaps the CFO, operations officer, someone else?
Excellent question. Do you want to take it first, Mindy?
I would highly encourage them not to. I think there's a little bit of a conflict of interest. I would look for a third-party organization, so working with someone like Malik and Malik or an association to get a lot of that data. There's going to be a conflict of interest if you go to an employee who reports to the CEO, and then it might cause some contention between that employee and the CEO as well, as they're helping you with that process. And the board has one employee. They have the CEO as their employee. And so if you go around the CEO to work with their staff on what that compensation might look like, the CEO might be in a position either with the HR director or the CFO, whether they might be working through some different challenges they're having at the organization. And I think this offsets the relationship that the CEO has with those different individuals. And so it once again becomes really awkward, or makes the CFO or the HR director, creates a potential for them to think that they don't have to listen, or they don't have to respect the CEO maybe as much as they should.
And I mean, that's exactly right. That flows through the whole organization, right? You have an accountability chart for a reason. Like Mindy said, as a board of directors, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit, you have one employee, and you can either hire or fire that employee. You either trust them or you don't. You can work with them on performance if you want to work with them on performance. But going around that person is toxic. I mean, if your job is to ensure the success of the mission, you absolutely divert from that mission by undermining the person that's in charge of leading it to a better place with your high level direction. So don't put the employees of your employee in that position of having to feel like they are playing double agent inside the organization.
And a lot of data exists. And I think whether you're working, with a law firm or you're working with an association, they have access to that data. So there's resources out there for boards. It's just a matter of how you go about getting that data. I think that's critical.
All right, that concludes the questions I received in the chat so far, but if anyone else has any that they think of later or want to ask privately, feel free to email contact@malicattorneys.com. I put that in the chat as well. So feel free to reach out to us at any time. And Luke, would you like to close us out today?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to thank all of you for your time today. And if you're watching this as a recording, thank you for taking the time to watch it. Especially want to thank Mindy. You're awesome. So appreciate your friendship above all, but also your help with this webinar and helping us get this information out. And I hope it was useful to those of you who did attend to see just how important this process is, and hope it inspires you to put more resources into making sure that this is something that moves your organization forward. So thank you for your time today, and thanks, Kana, for helping us run this.
Absolutely. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
One moment here.